Board of Commissioners special called meeting and work session. I'll tell you, let's start with a quick word of prayer and a pledge of allegiance. How's that? Okay. Those who are willing and able, please stand. I will. Heavenly Father, thank you for the gift of today. Thank you for the gift of these commissioners and all they do to serve this county and their friends and their family and the extended county we call America. May what we hear today be used to inform us, to help us make better decisions that work to all public good. We live spoken and unspoken concerns in your hands, and as always, a special blessings on those that wear a uniform to protect our freedoms. We ask this in your name. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. Okay, thank you. Our first presentation today is the issue of the parking deck request for proposals. And with that, Eddie, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners, County Manager. It's our pleasure today to bring forward a proposal for the parking deck operation. As you know, we sent out an RFP. We got 5 responses. We interviewed 3 different companies, and today we're going to do a little short presentation about where we are on the parking deck, and then we're going to introduce one of the companies to you to talk about some options for you to consider. We will bring this item back at your direction, but we hope to bring it back in February. So that will give us some opportunity for y'all to think about it, have some discussion with staff, and then come up with a recommendation to bring that back to you. We had a committee that comprised of people from property, IS, finance, HR, and purchasing. If they will stand up, please. They worked a lot of hours on this, so if you get a chance, make sure you tell them thank you. A lot of them have been working on the parking deck for many, many years, so there's a lot of knowledge with that group of people. So, like I said, we interviewed 3 companies, and today you will hear from Last Parking, who is the committee's choice to run the operation of our parking deck. First, you're going to hear from Mr. Bill Volkman, and he'll give you a financial update.
Thank you, Eddie. So the reason why we're here today is, one, because the parking deck is losing money. So that's the idea of this slide. I want to give you at least some brief history of the parking deck's operation, and these numbers are net of the general fund subsidy. So if you look at the net income / loss column for the last several years, you'll see that those are all negative. So without general fund support, this fund is losing dollars. And since 2014, we have contributed just over $1.3 million from the general fund to support parking deck operations. Now, the big driver of that is the debt service, which is on the far right column. This is an escalating debt service schedule. So you can see those step-ups each year. Those will continue through the life of the debt. So we'll have incremental step-ups as we go, because that's how the debt service was built when we originally went out to build the new deck. Now, these decks are tied together with the same debt issuance. So that's why when we talk about parking deck, we are talking about both decks here. So this is the operation for those decks. Just to give you a little bit of background, and I'm going to turn it over to Georgie with Laz to come up and talk about their ideas and where we're going to go from here.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Georgie Taja. I'm the Senior Vice President with Laz Parking. I can tell you a little bit about us. We've been in business for 38, 39 years. I personally have been parking cars for 35 years. I started my career as a valet parker, moved my way up, and today I'm in charge of the southern half of the country for our company. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. So this is where we are located throughout the country. We run over 2,000 locations, and we manage over $1 billion worth of revenues throughout. Here in Atlanta, in Georgia as a whole, we have about 180 properties and close to 1,000 employees. Some of the clients that we manage for is the SunTrust Park with the Atlanta Braves. We worked on that since birth, and we've been there managing the entire parking assets. We also manage the Limburg Station and the State Farm Arena. The reason I put these 3 locations in here, we got obviously 180 of them. These are pretty challenging operations that requires a lot of, knowledge and expertise in the parking. And they're not just your typical Monday through Friday. There's events, there's employees, there's all kind of activities in the garage that goes every single day. So this is from a comparable standpoint. I want to walk you through some of the ideas that we put out there. When we got the RFP, the plan was to really draft a plan to keep it pretty much balanced between making money and provide the service to the citizens, the employees, and everybody else's. Any plan can come up and be like, let's make all the money we can, but then you're going to be sacrificing services for employees and staff and citizens and everybody else. So the idea was keep that balance throughout the entire plan. So some of the findings and some of the ideas that we came up with, like for example, keeping the gates down all the time. And if you come to the garage at certain hours, sometimes the gates are up. You get challenged with an event, people trying to leave. You want to get them all out as soon as possible. You're left with no choice but to raise the gate and get them out. In our model, we're going to keep the gates down. And if you do that, you can raise about $163,000. The second thing is eliminate reserve parking. So in our business, a reserve parking space is a dead parking space. It doesn't allow you to turn. It doesn't allow you to generate more income from the same parking space. Once you sell it as reserve, it's done. There's nothing you can do about it. So the idea behind this is if we eliminate the reserve spaces, there is a term we use in our business, it's called oversell. Airlines oversell seats. Hotel oversell rooms. We do the same thing. So we figured out mathematically how many people are not showing up on any given day. We take that number and we apply to it an oversell. This way, you're always having occupancy in the garage generating revenue. That's the plan. Modify the incremental rate structure. We looked at the rates, and most people think if I increase the all-day rate, I'm going to generate more income. That's not necessarily true all the time. We target certain rate bands where we can get the biggest bang for the buck based on the user's occupancy of the garage. So we propose a new rate increase. For example, right now you got your first 30 minutes free. Well, in our industry, we measure the grace period. How long would it take somebody to go from level 1 to the rooftop and back? And that's how we set the grace period. It doesn't take 30 minutes to drive up to the rooftop of the garage to see there's no spaces available and come out. There's 15 minutes. So if we reduce the grace period from 30 minutes to 15 minutes, the balance is there. You come in, you're looking for parking space. In 15 minutes, if you can't find it, you get out for free, no problem. If you stay longer, it's going to cost you money. Clearly, you found the parking space. That's why you stayed. Increase the monthly parking rate by $10. One of the questions that we asked during the RFP process, when was the last time the rates were increased? And the feedback we got, decade. Well, we all know the cost of living goes up. People, over years, over term, they pay more for things. Well, the parking rate hasn't moved in a long, long time. So we're proposing a minimum of $10 a month. That's less than 50 cents a day. And that $10 will generate another $116,000 for you. The other thing we propose, and we don't put a dollar amount to it, but parking is about control. Right now, you got jurors getting free parking, you got different departments validating and doing. What we would like to do is know how much each cost center is validating for parking. Not to put a dollar amount to it and not to charge, but you'll have some control. You can see how much we spend, what is the value of the parking that the jurors consume? What is the value of parking when people come to visit the county? If you don't put a value to it, that means it doesn't exist. We know it exists. We just need to quantify it. Go to the next one, please. So again, if you do all of those great things, you're looking at producing another $423,000. I'm not saying do all of them. I'm not saying don't do any of them. Obviously, we have an opportunity here to try to close the gap. Our plan is not making you rich. It's not putting money into general fund, it's trying to close the gap. Instead of losing that 300 and some $1,000, we're trying to close that gap with our plan. Go to the next one, please. So on top of this, we address the operational challenges in the garage. And we came in here and we monitored, like, for example, 4 o'clock, 4:30, or 5 o'clock, when everybody's trying to leave, it gets to be a little challenging. All it takes is one car that sits in the queue to back up the entire garage, and most of you realize how long it's taking to get out of there. So what we would like to do is, we own parking equipment throughout, and our plan is to donate some of that equipment to the county. We want to, put in, and I don't need to walk into the details, but one of the things we would like to do is put a pay-on-foot machine. So when you come back from the building to the garage, before you get in your car and you drive up to pay, you can pay your parking, then get in your car. So when you get to the exit, you're really not doing much to get yourself out of there. So those are some of the examples that we also given you a ticket dispenser. If you try to get in the garage or just stand out there and watch the deck next door, most people try to get in where the employee entrance is, and they realize there's no ticket dispenser there. So they back out in the middle of the street, try to get into the middle lane. That's just an accident ready to happen. We're gonna donate a ticket dispenser that can be installed there to accommodate that need if it arises. So those are some of the technology stuff that we wanna provide you to ease the operation, get the people in and out of that garage, more importantly, capture the revenue that need to be captured, not raising the gates. You can go to the next one, please. So there's some options that I would like to discuss with you as far as the employee ingress and egress at peak, because that's really was the hot topic throughout the entire RFP. How do we do that? So we came up with various options. And if you look at option 1, we can really, in the Waddell deck, let's see, which plan? Yeah. So in option 1, and if you're familiar with the Waddell deck, when you come down to exit, right now you got, we call them transit exiting to the left to exiting to the right, while employees and monthly parkers trying to do the same thing. Well, our plan is to try to separate the two. So when you get to the bottom ramp, we can direct all the visitors to exit on the left side where the cashier booth is, and all the monthly parkers to exit on the right side. That will give you continuous flow of traffic. You're not sitting behind somebody who doesn't know how to put the credit card in and get all that process. So that's option 1. The good news in option 1, it doesn't cost you any money. Some signs, with the addition of the technology that I just discussed, that problem will be taken care of. Keep in mind, during peak time, we will have an ambassador at the exit helping people out in case somebody gets stuck for some reason. Option 2 is move all the transit parkers to the Lawrence deck. When we start looking at the garage, we figured, like, why don't we put all the employees in one deck and designate that deck for employee parking only? And then we can use the other deck for whatever leftover employees plus the transit parking. I mean, if you think about it this way, you all come in at the same time, you leave at the same time, there's nobody blocking your lane trying to, get you tied up. It's a great idea. It needs to be, followed through and think about. We think it's a great idea. Option 3, it's getting out of the Cherokee Street side. We were thinking about adding another exit there, like a reversible lane, if you would. A reversible lane during the ingress time will be used for ingress. During the egress time will become as an egress lane. And that will help the in and out as far as the garage is concerned. Option 5 is the option that don't consider. That's why we put it there. Option 5 is if somebody comes to you and said, take all the equipment out and we can just get the cars to flow in and out, we'll issue the employees hang tags and we know who they are, they can park there. That's the fastest way to lose control of the garage. You'll be losing a lot more money if you did that. Because now you have to do enforcement, you have to write citation, you have to collect the revenue, you have to make sure people are paying you to park there, not just employees, we're talking general public. So, go to the next one, please. So the question is, why would you select, LAS? Why you want to do this with LAS? And to me is, we build this business on creating opportunities for people. That's what we do. That's our mission statement. Every time when I get up in the morning, first thing that comes to my mind, how am I going to create opportunities for people? And when you do that, the profit becomes a result of what you do. It's not what you do it for. So we've been creating opportunities for 38 years, and I think we have a great opportunity here to create more opportunities for people and change their life in the process. When we say that, obviously, we got the experience to do it, you know. From me and the rest of my team, there's at least 200 years of parking experience. So we can bring all that to the county and try to apply some of those best practices and how can we make this thing do what we want it to do. And quite frankly, we live here, we're citizens. So if we don't close the gap, we know what's coming next. So we need to work really hard to try to close the gap. We understand the deficit, we know it. We're gonna do all we can try to close that gap. And I'm not saying just by rates. You're gonna have a relentless partner. We're gonna go out and market the garages. Where can we find more money to do this? Where can we generate more? I mean, it could be, I don't know, it could be crazy ideas like marketing, advertising, whatever it is that we need to do just to close the gap. And, you know, the access to technology that we provided you, the value of the equipment that we're doing, obviously, it's gonna be really important to ease in and out of that garage and solve some of the operational challenges that we have while keeping the gates down and generate the revenue that we need to generate. So this is our plan. It's really, you know, we feel it's gonna work. If we do all of those things that we talked about, we all benefit. I don't see anything in it that could cause a lot of heartburn. It's just a matter of applying the best practices that we know from our business, especially doing it for over 38, 39 years. Thank you for your time. Thanks.
Presentation, well done.
Questions? Remember, you're going to have some time to think about it, and you can ask us, you can ask staff questions, me and Bill, anybody on the committee. Georgie doesn't mind coming back and speaking with you also, but if you've got some questions now, we're more than happy to take them.
Commissioner Burrell has a question.
Yes.
With the deficit we have now on the deck, with which option or plan would bring us up to breaking even or better than? And what time frame?
I think if you apply all these recommendations that we mentioned up there, from rate adjustments to employee part, all those great things, I think you can get there. We estimated $423,000 that we can generate, or the first run. I think the gap is less than that. So a worst case scenario, you can close the gap.
Yes.
Do we have what is the number?
Well, right now,
Figure.
I mean, our last year, you were at just north of 350. So, I mean, and with the escalating debt service, this would be, we looked at these numbers, you're looking at good shape. So I think, there you go, for 18, it was 316. Now, remember, 18 was the first year we did some of those parking deck changes that we did last February. So you're seeing, it is stepping up, but the reason that the step up is debt service. So as Georgie said, if you did all of the options that were presented, that would close the gap and then some. So, and that was an annual impact. So obviously if we did those, tomorrow, by the end of September, we wouldn't have closed that gap, but we have made strides to do so. That's based on an annual impact of those changes, the 400,000+.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Ott.
Nowhere in there do we talk about what's the cost of the contract. I mean, is that factored into this set of numbers?
That is not. We have not sat at the table and really negotiated that yet. We kind of know ballpark, but we haven't got to that.
So with that
number.
ballpark, I don't need to know the number, but with the ballpark, Commissioner Burrell's question, are we still,
We're still good. We're still fine.
okay.
Yes.
Commissioner Cupid?
Yes, I have a few questions, and some of these we can address offline
Okay.
because they've been part of our prior discussion, but I wanted to get some clarification on the reserve spaces and the approach to eliminating some of those and transitioning those to the transient parking.
So we've taken a lot of properties where there's obviously a lot of reserved spaces, right? So people tend to like the reserved space. It's for me, I know where to go, where to park every day. But like I said, when you have a reserved space at $30 a month, you kill the space and you value it only at $30.
Okay.
So without getting into too much mathematical things, so if you take, let's say, your transient parker that pays on average of $4 a day, 4 times 20 days, it's $80 a month.
I hear
So
you.
that's your value of the space, the $80 versus the $30 that you're getting, you're leaving a lot of money on the table.
Yeah.
So the idea is eliminate the reserve, make it non-reserve. You can come in and park anywhere you want, but we will turn the space to generate more income for you.
Okay, and I'm sure there's some variation of that. Like I saw one of your slides had suggested an option where those that were monthly or regular users of the deck could park on the upper floors, and then you can reserve transient
Yeah.
parkers to the lower levels.
If we eliminate the reserve, you can park anywhere you want in the deck. There is no more designated employee parking reserve spaces. So the deck becomes like a free flow deck. You know, you
Okay.
come in early, you park on the lower level. You come in late, obviously you park on the upper level. But there will
Okay.
be no dedicated a parking space for a certain user.
Okay. Another question I had is, how do you work with the business community where they have patrons using the deck? That's one of the main criticisms we received as we were contemplating this process and actually implemented it, is how that impacted the businesses in the square. And one thing I don't see is if there's even a partnership with a voucher system or something of that nature. Can you describe any experience you have in that?
Sure.
Mhm.
We didn't put it in the presentation, but it is at the core of our business. Obviously the garages are here to serve the community and serve the businesses. So we will be meeting with these businesses and understand their needs. We can set up, a voucher system or validation system. Employees of these businesses, especially at nighttime during the off-peak, we can offer them a discounted rate to park in the garage. The garage is wide open. Why not give them a discounted rate to let them park there instead of parking somewhere on the street and keep doing this all day and all night. So those are opportunities that once we in here, remember what I said, you're gonna have a relentless partner looking for opportunities.
I received that.
We think this is a great opportunity to capture more revenue there.
Very good. I have one last question for you. We initially had a machine-only system, I believe, and then we did have challenges with people having difficulty exiting the parking deck. And you had some approaches that would, different variations of how we can address that. But does your model include having a person on site in addition to having the machines or technology that you?
Yes, during peak time of days, we will have an ambassador out there. I mean, technology is great, but if it fails, you need somebody to help get the people in and out of there. So during the peak time, yes, we will definitely have somebody there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm a little confused on the option with all employee parking in this deck. And if you're taking away all the reserved parking, are you assuming that the deck would only be employees?
So that's one of the suggestions we're saying. Instead of having employees here and employees there and employees mixed in with the public there, they get to the exit at 4 or 5 o'clock, whatever time of day, they don't know how the machine works and they're blocking all the exits and everything else. If you look at this deck and during regular business hours, make it for an employee of the county only. And then you take the reserve and just free flow. Come in, park anywhere you want. It's dedicated to employees from 9 a.m. till call it 6 p.m. After 6 p.m., we'll turn it into a public parking. It goes back into the mix as a public parking. But during business hours, you consolidate all your employees here. In the Lawrence deck, you have better setup. You can easily flow in and out from a transient standpoint without blocking everybody. And if your majority of your employees are here, you're talking about an ingress and egress does not affect their coming in or coming out.
Okay.
That's the plan.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Eddie. George?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next agenda item is present information regarding upcoming recommendations on changes to the Cobb County Code, right?
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners, County Manager. The purpose of this agenda item is to present information regarding upcoming recommendations to the two changes in the county's code. By way of background, this is a package 2 that was sent out and includes suggested recommendations for Chapter 2, 6, 10, 58, 86, 90, and 134. The first section relates to the minor amendments to the Board of Ethics. Bill, were you going to present that?
Chair and Commissioners, the changes that we're making related to the Board of Ethics is one that we had spoke to you about. This as a result of a Georgia Supreme Court case, which was decided in August of 2018. The case is DeLay versus Sutton. In that case, a commissioner, member of the DeKalb County Board of Commissioners challenged the composition of the Ethics Board. In that, the Ethics Board was actually appointed by non-elected officials. Our current code section, the way that it is drafted, also allows for non-elected officials to make appointments to the Ethics Board. And so what our draft changes are is to respond to the Georgia Supreme Court ruling saying that those appointments would be considered to be unconstitutional, they need to be made by elected officials. Consequently, we went and identified those elected officials, they're countywide elected officials, and given each of those persons for a 7-member board to make elections. Because if a criminal case comes out as a result of the Board of Ethics complaint, that is pursuant to the code moved to Superior Court in the District Attorney's Office for them to be able to prosecute. We've not asked for District Attorney Reynolds or the Superior Court judges or our Superior Court clerk to make appointments to that board for potential conflicts that would exist as a result of that. Therefore, we've identified those other elected, countywide elected officials to make those appointments. We have left into the code one additional, or the additional appointment from the board to be able to make an appointment, which we a board-wide appointee. It has been suggested to us, the way that we drafted the code, each one of the appointees would run concurrent with the term of that elected official that was ordered, that would be making the appointment. We had neglected to include that component in the code. We would suggest that on an edit that we could make, that the board's appointee to the ethics code would run concurrent with the chairman's term on the board. The rest of the changes really are in the ethics code. We're just, while we were in there, we decided to go ahead and do some cleanup measures. We addressed some removal issues, and then most of the other changes were related to board, office holder, and so just some gender neutral terms that we made. I don't know if the board had any other questions for us.
Questions from the board? Okay.
No, I appreciate that clarification
Sure,
from this morning.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill.
Picking up something that I need.
Need to leave Michael his portion.
Okay. Actually, no, thank you. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. The next section of the code relates to administration and economic development. This generally is just some amendments to clarify code content in that section of the code, and specifically just addresses some of the water system incentives that are offered by the various economic incentive programs. And that the sponsor for this particular item was Commissioner Cupid and the County Attorney's Office. The next set, or next chapter,
Are there any questions from the board on that
I'm
section?
sorry, excuse me.
Sure, Commissioner Cupid, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Chairman, you have been very helpful in including the commissioners as these have been assessed. And I know it's been your practice that you would like for all of us to view these before they move forward.
Right.
When I look at this text, though, I don't see that codified. And so if we're not in a position where someone takes that initiative upon themselves to do that, we could be in a situation where the commission is in the dark about.
Yeah, so
as they
we
move
want to have language that clearly states that these amendments should be reviewed by all members of the board,
Okay.
all right? Because there's a lot of moving pieces in this county, but I think that, again, my experience with the board members is that if you bring it before them, you know, they appreciate it, and secondly, we have a more informed decision. So if we could reflect the language to make sure that all these all these incentives and everything are brought before the board members. Make sure before we present them to the board before we put them on the agenda item. Okay, in other words, walk the halls,
Yes, sir.
all right?
And
Does that work
Mr.
for you, Commissioner Cupid?
Yes, sir.
That
Thank
address
you.
your
I
concern?
appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Chairman Boyce, I did want to mention that as part of, when the board amended the ordinance itself in February of 2018, there were several amendments made to the policy that kind of marries up or sisters with the incentives ordinance itself, and that's very clearly stated also.
Is that stated in
Commissioner.
the
Yes,
policy
ma'am.
that
It is.
precedes
Yes,
this?
ma'am.
Okay, because I'm not necessarily asking for it to
Pardon
be
me.
redundant, it's just not listed here. So
Well,
it's
but I
just
think in the
important to
case
me to-
here, it's probably not a bad idea to have a reminder in there, because there's a lot of ordinances out there, okay? And I think for some, particularly involving community development and that program there, there are so many things happening right now that it doesn't hurt to remind the staff themselves, because the staff sometimes turns over, to have a gentle reminder in there about making sure that these are all, that the hall is always walked with all these before we bring them to the board before we include them in the agenda book.
Yes, sir.
And just beyond that too, I don't think the policy statement, does it have the weight of making it a requirement, or is it just providing background language?
Commissioner, I would probably yield to Mr. Rowling, but I do think the policy is referenced in the ordinance, but I don't believe that it would have the same effect as an ordinance as far as
Statement.
the weight. So I believe the chairman probably makes a good point. It would have a little bit more teeth if it were in what chapter is this, Mike?
Chapter,
If it were in chapter 2, it would
chapter
probably
2.
have a little bit more meat or a little bit more force than, is that correct, Bill?
I'd agree with that, and it'd also be easier to track as well.
There you
follow
go,
through.
yeah,
So-
exactly.
Thank you. Thank you.
all right, sir. The next item,
Oh, do you have a point?
Sorry.
Yeah, she had a question.
yes, sir.
I thought when we implemented this last February that we agreed that the district commissioner and the chairman and the county manager would bring it to the attention for a vote for all the commissioners.
You're correct, Commissioner Burrow. That was in the policy, and that's been the practice. I believe the direction we received from the board a few minutes ago might be that we do a better job of referencing it in Chapter 2. But you are absolutely correct, ma'am. Myself, the chairman, and the district commissioner all sign a concurrence memo before we provide the offer of incentives to any potential applicant.
And then it's been my practice that Millie or Janet
Email it
sends
out.
them out to all the commissioners to see what I've signed. But I think that we put some little bit more teeth in there, again, you know, as a matter of, okay, once they've been signed by the appropriate commissioners, then to provide that document to all the commissioners so they can see what is going on and they can factor that in. So again, there's no surprise when it shows up to be voted on by the board. It's just a simple administrative procedure that really goes to enhancing the board's ability to make a better informed decision. I've made a big commitment, no surprises, and it's very hard to have something presented to you on Monday before Tuesday when you could have known about it 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago. It gives you a little bit more time, because I keep reminding everybody that, you know, these 4 hardworking individuals are part-time, you know? And of course, that's just the inside joke that we all know it's not an inside joke anymore. But the more opportunity we give them to look at something, I think it just makes, the process goes a lot smoother.
Sure. I would add to that,
So-
Commissioner, I think your practice too has been to send out the actual conditional offer letter too, once you've signed that
Right.
as well.
And then what we're changing on the water system, would that still go through the same practice? Or that's just the county manager and water?
No, ma'am, what we are doing there is we're being very specific that there will never be a waiver of the SDF fees. Rather, there'll be a flexible payment schedule that will be offered.
Correct.
Okay. That's better. Thanks. That's all.
All right.
Any more questions?
All right,
Thank you for
Chairman.
making your liaison commissioner happy.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The next section, Chairman, relates to Chapter 6, and that's alcoholic beverages. The sponsoring commissioner here is Commissioner Cupid. And this particular item references amendments that cover regulations for rented public facilities for private events and the sale of alcohol at those private events. The regulation or the actual events and the facilities include the Jim Miller Park, Cobb County Civic Center, Jenny T. Anderson Theater, Mabel House Amphitheater. And basically under these provisions, they're allowed the sale of alcohol in these areas, designated areas for adult concessions only. The next section.
Anybody questions on that one? Okay, we're good, Michael.
All right, sir. The next section is Chapter 10, and that relates to an amendment for decreasing the age of rabies vaccinations for dogs, cats, and ferrets from 4 months to 3 months. And this was brought forward by Public Safety.
Okay. Commissioner, I'm sorry, Commissioner Gamble. Just we're having a bad day today, as I said earlier.
Thank you. Michael, I was wondering why we're proposing this change. I know the various veterinarian associations recommend 16 weeks for rabies vaccinations, and I also know the vaccines label on the actual vaccine has 12 weeks, and that's put out by the federal government, and getting that changed will be very almost impossible. But why would we want to make a requirement that goes against what the veterinarians, who are the professionals, would recommend to their clients?
Speaking with Captain Owens prior to him stepping down, it was a recommendation from the state to go with this. And Ms. Luke is in the audience. I'm not sure. Is that correct? The recommendation from the state is what we were following. If you would like, I'll be happy to get some more information for you and get that to you.
If you could, please, because
Absolutely.
I consulted with several veterinarians, and again,
Absolutely.
depending on the animal, they like to have that 12 to 16 range.
Okay.
Based on the size, the health. I understand that when we do the spay and neuter clinics, they're usually about at the 12-week mark, and they like to do the rabies because they're not sure if they'll see that animal again. So I understand it being applicable there, but not a mandatory based
Okay.
on other needs.
We'll get you some more information.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So the guideline right now, is it stated it's a requirement or?
It's a recommendation, if I'm not
But
mistaken.
the current ordinance, how does it read?
Oh, the current ordinance is 4 months.
4 months, right?
Yes.
All right, and that's mandated.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, I was just trying to get sure I got my facts here. Okay, thanks.
All right, so the next section relates to Chapter 58, and that's flood damage prevention. The sponsoring commissioner here is Commissioner Ott. And this simply just provides some clarifying language as it relates to land being used or should not be used, actually, occupied, developed, converted, or altered in any way unless it's in full compliance with this article or other articles.
Questions from the board? Okay.
So the next section relates to Chapter 86, and that's offenses and miscellaneous provisions. The sponsoring, well, this was brought forward by Ms. Hines in the solicitor's office, and this relates to amendment just to offer some clarification and intent and causation of congregation, particularly on pedestrian bridges that was added, just to deal with crowding and the potential for disorderly conduct on these pedestrian bridges.
Okay, I mean, what, we have unruly Cub fans, or, I mean, I just, well, I think our concern here is being overly regulation here, I mean,
Understood.
This is a
I'll
specific
let Ms.
instance
Hines
here.
address that.
Yeah.
Chair and Commissioners, and this is a ordinance that's been proposed on behalf of Solicitor's Office and Public Safety. It has to do with dealing with certain issues, especially we have our pedestrian bridges that are going into SunTrust Park, and as the county evolves, we have other pedestrian bridges that are coming into play. And we currently do not have an ordinance on the books to deal with the issue that we've dealt with within the last 2 years of having the pedestrian bridge that we have, which is where people will congregate on that bridge, and it causes a jam of people going in to and fro. We have traffic violations for people with regard to impeding the flow of traffic, but we don't have anything with regard to an ordinance that deals with pedestrian traffics as such. And this is just an ordinance which would give them a fine for that purpose. And this is something that we've worked pretty hard on to address this issue and be something that will grow with the county as well as the county keeps going on. The last thing you need is to have someone clogging up, which we've had, whether or not it's a street performer or you have someone who's there and they're clogging up the flow of people who are walking on the bridge, and it becomes a safety hazard. Especially also, we also don't need anybody throwing anything over the bridges or anything. So it's to keep the traffic going of the people walking to and fro on the pedestrian bridges, and that was one of the reasons for doing that. We do have something that is on the books, which is under 86-2 which is under our disorderly conduct. Disorderly conduct is requiring a little bit more of the person being more of an obstruction to officers after they've told them to move on. And that usually is something that an officer would use if they were doing an arrest of some sort. They could use that statute. But we're trying to talk about and stop the issue with people who are just standing there and they're causing this issue. This is to be able to order that flow of traffic for that. And we did a slight amendment to that 86-2H, which also says that if someone causes people to stop, it causes people to obstruct the traffic and they don't listen to officer direction, that they can also be cited under that. And I don't know.
Well, here's my concern. Let's say I have Girl Scout Troop 54, all right, standing on the bridge between Galleria and going over to SunTrust Park, and they're taking pictures, all right, or they're taking a group picture. We're going to cite them?
No,
For
sir,
obstructing-
that's really just been to the point. It's about folks who basically set up and begin performing and doing things on these.
But that's a separate issue.
We should be
Well,
very
it's-
specific.
People taking pictures is not an issue, and it's
Right.
not causing, it's a quick pick and it's gone. People are moving on. It's the ones that are performing, doing things that cause a crowd to get around them.
I get that, but I think if the language specifically addresses that kind of concern, I think the board probably will work there. I think what the board's really nervous about here is that we're starting to tell people where they can or they can't stand. And I think that overall, that's just really hard for the board to swallow.
So, and Chair, and I completely understand that, and we've worked on this very hard in understanding that, right? We want people to be able to have the right to be where they want to be. And so it's not for the person taking a picture. If you read the way that it's constructed, and we've worked on this pretty well, you are obstructing the flow of traffic. Somebody taking a quick photo is not obstructing the flow of traffic. The person who is causing 25-something people to stop, and you have to try to go around, and there's no room. If you can look at the pictures, there's no room to go around. That's obstructing the flow of traffic. A Girl Scout person who's there who has a picture to take, that's quick to the point, there you go. But it's when you cause that clog and there's no other place to go around. That is the point of the pedestrian bridge, to keep walking.
Commissioner Cupid.
I share the chairman's sentiment, and I only know my sister lives in Louisville, and so my family often goes on this bridge. And even just having two pesky children, I sometimes feel as if we could we might be impeding someone's traffic and trying to corral them when one is going fast on their bike, one is going slow, we're stopping in the middle of the bridge. And I automatically thought of them when I read this because this language is broad enough to consider anyone, stopping anyone from being able to pass. But I do like your more narrow definition of who you would be targeting. And it would be helpful if this was more narrow to get to who you're talking to, because even trying to get 25, let's say if you had 25 Girl Scouts together, you might think it's brief, but it, you know, corralling them, getting them to pose, getting the short ones in the front and all of that, it can take time. And so I'm concerned too, just not seeing that language narrowed enough to make sure that we aren't being too broad in how we draft this.
Understood, Commissioner. And one of the things that we had to be considerate about is that you have to, on some levels, be broad, because if we were to do something dealing with street performers specifically, it gets into First Amendment issues. We're not trying to legislate what somebody is saying if they want to do it. We just want to keep the flow of the traffic moving, and that's one of the concerns. And in working with the county attorney's office, it was our understanding that if we narrowly tailored it any more with regard to street performers as such, we would be getting ourselves into some litigation issues.
Okay, the language states where an official sign prohibits stopping or standing. So would these be intermittent throughout the bridge, or are there just key areas where you don't want to see this activity?
So it would be, if my understanding, it would be either at the front, so that they would be put on notice of it. It's the same thing that we have with regard to when people are parking. If you go to some place and you'll see no parking or stopping, it's the same idea. There's a sign that tells you you cannot park or stand here, you gotta keep moving.
I understand, I really do, I understand your concerns, how people can stop. And if I'm not mistaken, at this point, we could ask them to move on, but we really don't have a lot of teeth in that, because we really don't have an ordinance in place to say, move on. They could say,
Yeah.
no, I'll stay here.
Exactly. So I think this can be, trust me, I'm not criticizing the ordinance to the extent I'm saying don't have one. It's just I'm asking for your help in helping us to narrow it more so it's not making this, it doesn't seem to be creating an unpleasant environment for anyone that could be going on the bridge and enjoying the opportunity to cross over from one side of the interstate to the other.
Yeah, but I think part of the problem, and I'm not the lawyer, she is and you are, but I think the problem is in narrowing it, you start getting into the First Amendment rights. And so it intentionally has to be broad. And it really almost to the discretion of the police officer who might go out there to determine if something's a problem.
Exactly, but that's the concern, is having too broad of a discretion. Is, you know, because then people will feel unfairly targeting, because you're saying I'm stopping traffic, but look at those group of girls and look at that family, and they kept somebody from being able to cross too.
And Commissioner, not to belabor the point, but we use this on the same basis that we do with patterning like with our vehicles, where you cannot stand or stop, and that is regulated, because that area is such a small area. It is truly a public safety concern when we have people stopping or causing a large crowd to stop in that area. There's no other place for people to go around, and it becomes an issue. And the only other thing I can say at this point, I mean, whatever Director Heaton would like, we can take whatever comments and try to see if there's something else that we can work with.
Yeah, I mean, I read the wording. I think we just had something like, about impeding the free flow of traffic. The difference between cars and people is cars don't have the flexibility that people do, all right? So your point about cars as well is it's kind of in the ballpark, but for me, people are a lot different because they have options, whereas cars don't. I mean, I can't turn a car around or back it up and put it on a sidewalk. So I think that the intent here is I hear what you're trying to do, but there's a number of challenges. First of all, you are leaving it within the discretion of the police officer, And Sam, you and Mike Register and, you know, all these other officers know that people see things differently.
Sure.
Okay? And we do not want to put that police officer in the position of having to broadly interpret something where coming and says, well, like the commissioner said, hey, you know, those people over there, they're fine, what's with me? And we don't do that to the police officer. So I think if you had something that would come back, the whole purpose here is to keep the free flow of traffic. That's the intent, all right? With that, the police officer can do all kinds of things with, all right? So I think if we came back with some language to that effect, you know, probably get to your point, and also more importantly, we could get the votes on the board, all right, to pass it. So I think if you just take our discussion here and try to find that range in there, I think your way would work to something. But the bottom line here is I think that it goes back to who we are as Americans. We really believe in our freedoms and our liberties. And it's just very difficult at least from my concern, I do not want to put the police officer in a position of having to defend something that's indefensible because, you know, he's not sitting there to have a one-on-one discussion about, you know, what First Amendment rights look like. Whereas I think if a police officer can look, the intent here is to keep people moving, people will work with you on that. If your intent is, well, you can't stand there, why is that? Because the law says you can't do it. Well, you know, all of a sudden you got a problem, all right? Because that goes back to historical issues of people abusing those ordinances for other purposes.
We would take your advice and we'd take it back. But I think you just made our case. I mean, you said if the officer says move on and there's a law there.
Right.
That's kind of what we're trying to do.
But it's how you
We'll-
write that law, all
But
right?
we'll take it back and
Yeah.
kind of hammer it out and see if we can't
Okay,
make
all
it
right.
fit. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Burrow, I'm sorry, I didn't mean, yeah. No, she's good, she's fine.
The next chapter relates to Chapter 90, Parks and Recreation. And the sponsor for this is Commissioner Cupid as well. And this just offers, it just references the earlier code amendment, or proposed code amendment in Section 184, allowing alcoholic sales at county-owned facilities.
We good?
Questions? Yes, sir. Any questions?
Think the board's fine with those?
Okay. The next section is Section 134, and that, Section 121, that relates to rezoning of land use permits applications. And that one simply allows the submittal of a rezoning application by the county, offers that clarification in terms of who can initiate a rezoning application: the owner, the person with the consent of the owner, or the Board of Commissioners. And the amendment covers the procedure for county initiated rezonings.
Any questions? Commissioner Gamble? No, I recognized her first. Yeah, it was a head fake.
I know, Michael, we spoke about this earlier. My first question was, is an overreach of power for the Board of Commissioners to initiate a rezoning? And that came about from the number 2, where it said a county-initiated zoning. And it is my understanding from our conversation that this was only applicable to county-owned property, correct?
I believe that's my understanding.
Okay, but when I first initially
No.
read this,
Right.
I did not get that
Right.
impression. Also back on A1, you referenced the process, but what is that process? Or is that something that's further defined down in the code? And then my other question was, is should the county be able to rezone county-owned property without an applicant? Because we could indirectly drive up cost. And then in B, the wording has rezoning or land use permit from an applicant or owner, but it does not reference the Board of Commissioners as we were given up in A. And then at the end of that, it says procedures as set forth in this section shall be followed. But if the Board of Commissioners is not referenced in here, would those procedures be applicable to us?
We need to significantly clean up the wording in this, because this is one of those things where you just have to make sure, even if you repeat yourself, it's very clear what the steps are.
Yes, sir.
Because we all know that zonings by themselves are already sensitive issues. So let's make sure that it's black and white, what it is we're trying to do here, and the language reflects that. You're absolutely
And,
right about that.
Mr. Chairman, I believe all we need to do is, there were several sections that were truncated for brevity, I think. And I think if we were to add those to provide information, that might answer some of the questions.
It makes it a little onerous, but it also makes it very clear when you do that.
Correct, sir.
And I don't know of a better instance where we need to do that in zoning language. Commissioner Burrow, do you have a quick comment?
Rarely, but there have been other business items that we have brought forward that wasn't county property.
Yes, ma'am.
So if we put only county property,
Yeah,
could be an issue.
I agree. I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
No, I just
Commissioner.
wanted to clarify that we have done that in the past, not much, but we have had situations where we brought it forward rather than the owner of the property or the applicant.
There was one time that was done because it was, the owner of the property needed clarification from what the board had decided. It was in Commission District 2, and there was some clarification as to what the board had decided years back, and so the county brought it in as a zoning item. But no, I can't think of any other time.
I've had one in my district.
Yeah.
Commissioner
Chairman,
Cupid, sure.
I would like to see our
I'm sorry?
representative
Are
from
you
the
done?
county attorney.
Okay.
It is my understanding that county commissioners do have authority to zone property without having to have express permission from the property owner. So I'm wondering, is this code, by saying, by limiting here, are we limiting our power as a commissioner or authority as a commissioner to be able to zone property without the applicant bringing it forward?
I'm not sure if I understand your question correctly.
Yeah. A commissioner, and I understand this commission has actually rezoned a property without it being applicant initiated. And what I'm hearing is a request that a commissioner only have the ability to bring forward zoning on county-owned property. But it's my understanding that a county commissioner has broader authority in zoning property than just county-owned property.
I'd have to look at that, Commissioner Cupid, to see if you're wanting the broader, you're saying this might restrict your authority that you already have? Is that
Yeah,
what that
and I'm not
question
saying
is?
that, and it's my understanding it's a limited practice, but I'm concerned about reducing police power of the commission, which is to legislate health, safety, and welfare. And if there's a significant health or safety or welfare concern, the county commission should have the ability to be able to zone in its police power.
We can take a look at that and see how that would work. You're saying basically by setting out how you do it here, you then would be eliminating the ability to be able to do it without going through this process.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not saying it should be a broad practice of the commission, but I'm just concerned about narrowing it in the text.
Commissioner Ott.
All right, I mean, I hate to disagree with Commissioner Cupid, but I've been on this board for 10 years and planning commission for 4 before that, and I've never seen the county zone someone else's property. Let me finish, please.
I've only been told this, so.
Well, I know, I'm just telling you, 14 years, we have not done it. Anytime that the Board of Commissioners has brought a piece of property in, it has been owned by the county. It may be part of a deal, like for example, on Powers Ferry and Terrell Mill,
Okay.
it was county-owned property that was going to be sold. And we actually have another property that's kind of going through the works now that the county is going to sell, but the county is going to bring it in for rezoning first. So, and like I said, the only other time was the one, and I think it was Rivers Call, Rob, wasn't it, where we brought the property in because there was a question as to whether or not they could have a gate on a public road.
That's correct. I believe staff brought that forward, seeking
Right.
direction from the board as to
And
that.
so it came as a zoning case, but it was not actually a rezoning, and that was simply because the stipulations back at that time, they were led to believe that they could have a gate. Well, county code didn't allow a gate on a public road, so it came in as a zoning hearing, but it was not actually rezoning the land.
Okay.
And I would not be supportive of the board having the ability, whether we have it or not, I would be fine with restricting. I do not believe it's right for the board to be zoning private property.
Okay,
I
I don't
did
disagree.
want to mention I believe that Commissioner Cupid has been informed by me in years past that OCGA and the Zoning Procedures Act would allow for counties
law, the state
to
law.
initiate a rezoning. So you have been told that,
Okay.
Commissioner
I know-
Cupid, because
know
I think it
somebody from
resides
staff, I
in,
didn't know it was you, but I do know state law expressly provides authority to a county commission
that's
or
correct.
a local governing body specifically to be able to zone property.
And
But-
I think Mr. Rowland could probably run that down.
But a
It's
commission,
36 steps.
we can always be more restrictive than state law. We can't be less restrictive. So if the board decides that they want to put in only county property, there is nothing illegal or wrong with that.
I don't know, it sounds like the law gives us, I'm sorry, Commissioner Burrow, go ahead.
Rob, we did a other business item on Hidden Forest in my district
Yes, ma'am.
years ago.
Staff was seeking direction from the board as to the interpretation of one of the stipulations. You're correct, Commissioner
And
Burrow.
that was private property, but, we initiated that on behalf of the homeowners
Yes, ma'am.
after a public meeting I had and all that. But I wouldn't agree with, us having the power to rezone something that's private property without their permission to bring it forward. I mean, what's the difference of that and eminent domain?
Again, and we're getting in areas of law that I don't have the ability to explain or the latitude, but the commission in its zoning power, police power, has the ability to zone to protect the health, safety, and welfare of its population. So you can have instances where you have a property that is obstructive to those three matters, and the board in exercising its authority on behalf of its citizenry can change the zoning for it in its full police power. And again, it's not for me to be able to explain here, but I would like the county attorney to at least be able to provide some clarification on the law so that the board is clear on what its authority is, constitutional authority is, because this is not even state authority, this is constitutional zoning police power.
Kind of reminds me of that line out of the Old Testament, out of St. Paul saying everything is possible, but not everything is reasonable. So I'm not, even if the state gave us that power, I'm not so sure anybody on this board would want to bring it forward.
Yeah.
Because the firestorm, that would let, there's a reason we do eminent domain, all right, and we have a process for that. But to get involved in the rezoning as a county, the law may give that power to us, but man, I tell you, I for one wouldn't want to be the one to bring that forward.
I think I understand the commissioner's question, and I'll get with her after the meeting too. and We'll track this down and see what we can do for her. Okay.
Okay, any other discussion?
All right, sir. The next two items relate to design overlay districts. The first one being the Mableton Veterans Memorial Design Overlay District. This one is being brought forward to codify the design guidelines for those respective corridors, which are two key thoroughfares in the Cobb County, South Cobb County District 4. They carry significant volumes of traffic and have multiple commercial node activities. The purpose of intent in this case is just to enable and encourage the implementation of those design guidelines prepared by the Planning Division in designated boundaries.
Good, great. Sure.
I know we have a couple of people from the Mableton area who are here. When our community started talking about the guidelines, it was with the desire that we would move to an overlay district so that we can have greater controls on the appearance of property overall. The guidelines were limited to commercial property. An overlay district does not necessarily need to be. So I've been having communication with staff about whether or not we bring this forward, knowing that at some point in time, we'd like to see this have a broader impact in the community. So I'm afraid for it to come back twice. Do we just try to get it right to address all the concerns and the intent of the community? So tomorrow night, we have a community zoning meeting, and if present, we can have a little bit more dialogue about this before our next hearing.
Sure, and even when we bring it forth for an agenda item, if you want it, there's public comment. So, yeah, ample opportunity to have their points to be expressed.
All right, so the next item is the University Overlay District. And the purpose of intent of this is just to promote high-density residential redevelopment activity in the area near Kennesaw State University's main campus.
Yep, that's the wrong, we've got the wrong map here. Unless Kennesaw State is down in Mableton, this would be one heck of a move.
Keep going. We actually may not have a
Okay,
slide for
all
that,
right.
but we'll get a slide for you
Okay,
for
all
that,
right.
sir.
So what was the intent of that, again, just so get
To
it on
promote
record here?
high-density development and redevelopment in the area near KSU. This is in support of the student housing study that was
Sure,
done
right.
last year. It provides application procedures, and it also provides review criteria for applications that are submitted seeking this designation.
Okay. Commissioner Burrow?
This is in response to the moratorium we have
Yes, ma'am.
currently on public-built student housing. There's also an open house tomorrow night from 6 to 8
Yes.
with it'll have stations for the maps and the overlay district, what we're discussing now. And it's at the Siegel Center at KSU.
Is that down in Mableton?
No, sir.
Just want to make sure I'm in that place.
No, sir.
KSU. Go Owls.
You're more than welcome to come. I mean, we can give you the address. Both KSU and Mableton. You're down here already. We might
I
as
may
well just
take you
invite
up
you
on
over.
that. Sorry. All right, we got that one cleared up.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Gamble has a question.
Yes, sir.
I've got a list.
All right, sure.
Back in the presentation that I believe was done last October on the purpose-built student housing, it was commented that KSU did not know how many were actual students in their apartments and how many were renters. The code doesn't reflect that these would be strictly for students. It also brings up an enforcement issue of how will we ensure that only students do rent these and they do not become general rentals. The next question is what if KSU sells these to a third business to operate? Again, how do we keep regulating and control that they serve the purpose of purpose-built student housing and not some other purpose? In the comprehensive plan, on page 11, it states that that Cobb County, in conjunction with the city of Kennesaw, should closely monitor student housing options in the area. We know that Kennesaw has just done a bunch of apartments. We were at their State of the City last week. How will what they're doing to address the student housing work in conjunction with what we're proposing here? And again, where is the working agreement between the two to ensure an appropriate mix? On 1A, you reference that the boundaries of the UOD are depicted on the map as depicted in the comprehensive plan. I did not find the UOD district outlined in the comprehensive plan, so that would be something we would have to add. Also, and then B2, we say the renovation or expansions of multifamily housing structures exceeding 50% of the assessed value. Should it be the Board of Commissioners' place to put a value on what needs to be done to upgrade it? We don't enforce price points. How can we enforce this?
But the 50% isn't a price point.
It's related to fire safety. The fire safety code is if you do a renovation or upgrade that's greater than 50% of the fair market value, you have to meet the current code.
Okay, but that's fair market value, and this says assessed value.
I think that might need to change, assessed value.
Yeah,
That's 40% of the fair
But
market
basically,
value.
what it's all about is it's the trigger that determines that you have to meet the new code
Okay.
versus existing in the building.
Okay.
But her point's well taken.
Then on number 4, it states the minimum tract size shall be greater of that required by the underlying zoning. Not all of our zoning codes have a minimum tract size. So how would that be applicable here? Number 11, it says a 10-foot landscape buffer shall be provided to any exterior property. In our zoning applications, we always hear we want the buffer to be equal to the existing zoning's buffer requirement. However, then in number 12, we then go and say it needs to be a 50-foot setback. So are we keeping the 10-foot landscape buffer and the 50-foot setback buffer separate here? Are we combining them? How will that be interpreted?
You're talking about this plan here.
Right, what is being presented right here, right now?
What we're looking at adopting.
Right, right.
Okay.
No, she's not done. She's not done.
Well,
Well,
I kind of like to go through each one and
Okay, I'm good with that.
Okay, all right, so
I'm
you want
good.
to go back to, you want to go back to one? All right, so why don't you read your first concern, Commissioner, and we'll,
Jason's not here, right?
No, sir. No, ma'am, he's not.
I think I can answer the first few if you can't, Michael, but just go ahead and start and I'll explain. This is public-built student housing. So the university's exempt. They can build whatever they want on their property. They're exempt from zoning. So this is like some of the ones that we currently have, companies that come in and build it. And because of the Fair Housing Act, we can't just designate students only. There can be someone who's not a student renting a room in there. And that has been challenged, and it's part of the Fair Housing Act that we can't designate it as students only. That was something we all had heartburn over for, you know, somebody coming in and renting a room like as an apartment, the way they do the, for you rent by the bedroom, and then you have a common area for the kitchen and living area that they all share. But there's legally, we can't restrict it to students only because of the Fair Housing Act.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, KSU is exempt from zoning and they can build purpose-built student housing right now without rezoning?
Yes.
Or going through an application. So why do we need a university overlay district if that's the case?
Because we're gonna set the boundaries with this overlay district of where we will allow student housing, private student housing, public built, but by private companies, not the university, where they can locate, where they can go, rather than all over the county. Because this is where it's being done primarily. We had two options when this came to us of all over the county or an overlay district. And the consensus was to go with the overlay district. But now that we're having public hearings and code amendment, that could change.
yeah, well, when we agreed to do the consensus with the overlay district, then we had to put up some guidelines, all right? If we don't want the overlay district, this goes away, because then you can just build houses wherever you want to.
And I believe a map of the draft
Sorry?
of the area under consideration will be at tomorrow night's open house, in which we'll be getting feedback, staff will be getting
Yeah.
feedback from those in
It
attendance.
should be in here too, though.
But there's nothing that prevents this from being built today without this.
That's
We
correct.
have a
If it's
moratorium.
public.
Well, I mean, other than the moratorium, I mean, the zoning code allows this to be built. This was an attempt to kind of regulate it.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, what's built as student housing today can be built once the moratorium's listed. We don't need this code to allow it to happen.
Anyway, so, but I think it's important, I'm gonna let you, finish here, but for tomorrow night, this discussion should be included in that discussion. If we're gonna do the overlay district, here's what the recommendations are based on the discussion today, okay?
Yes, sir.
So, we're not done with that yet, though. Okay, Commissioner Campbell, I'm sorry.
So then Commissioner Burrell, my other concern was, in the comprehensive plan, it says that we're supposed to work in conjunction with the city of Kennesaw to ensure the appropriate mix and minimize impact with the apartments. So I wasn't getting that this UOD code was doing that. Or is that something that will be done with the overlay district that's supposed to be in the comprehensive plan, which is not available for review right now?
Well, the overlay district is just unincorporated Cobb. We can't dictate what Kennesaw City does.
But I guess from what Commissioner Ott said is essentially this can be built anywhere right now in unincorporated Cobb. I thought
They can
this
if they come
overlay,
through zoning and ask for a SLUP.
right, but I thought this overlay district was kind of gonna say you could do that in this area, and we were gonna kind of define boundaries
Right.
for which
It does.
this would be applicable. But we don't have a map showing what that area looks like. Does it include the city of Kennesaw? Do we need to bring the city of Kennesaw in on this conversation?
It would
It
not
can
include the city of
Yeah, the
Kennesaw.
point she's making is, have we coordinated this discussion with Kennesaw? That's the real question, because that'll answer your question, all right?
Well, we had several meetings with a committee, so to speak, which included KSU representatives, City of Kennesaw, Town Center CID, all the players in that area and the HOA groups.
I think if what you have here reflects those meetings, all right? That goes to some of the concerns that Commissioner Gambrill has here, is that this isn't just something unilateral.
Right.
We have really made an effort here to bring in all the interested parties to have that discussion. And this product should reflect some of that discussion, I think.
And then my last point of concern is the very last paragraph. It says, to encourage the use of alternative forms of transportation. And then it goes on to say, within 1/2 mile of bus service provided. So if we allow this overlay to be built, does that lock the county into having to maintain some type of public transit to that location, even if that public transit isn't utilized?
It could also mean scooters.
Well, there is already transit and bicycles and everything in the Noonday Creek Trail. There's already transit service there in the overlay area.
So I guess, again, if this district was outlined and we knew what boundaries this was applicable to, that would help answer that question as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I don't feel that we should be having, like, say, our Cobb Link provide transit to KSU from their purpose-built student housing.
Yeah, so if we had something about this does not commit the county to transit unless the revision of the CTP reflects that, where we have a door both ways.
And, the language states to encourage the use.
Yeah,
So there's
right.
nothing to obligate it. I think it's just trying to get to the walkability
Right.
and uses of alternate
Alternative
forms of transportation
forms of
in the area.
transportation.
But there's nothing in here that's requiring the county to fund or maintain those changes.
Well, except it says, shall provide secure bicycle storage and be within. So the shall be and kind of made it binding to me.
Yes, but just not to the county. The site can do it. It was asked if the county's going to be requiring that or funding it. I mean, the
we
county
need
can
that.
have
We
the
need
sites do it, but the county doesn't need to pay for it, which is what I interpreted your question to be.
Commissioner Ott?
We'll be here
All right, I
to
guess the question is, since we know that this can be built today without just coming into a zoning, is what's being proposed with the overlay district, like Commissioner Gamble saying that we don't know where it would be, are you saying that with this code change, they would not have to come to zoning, they could just build in that district?
No, they still have to come through zoning.
They still
So
have to come through.
what's the purpose of having it? If they still have to come through zoning like they would today, what is it accomplishing?
Well, it's
Well,
kind of like,
stipulation-
It's like a special service
But it's kinda like,
district.
you know,
It's where you
your-
want it to be.
it's kind of like
Outside of
your master studies, it shows the intent of what we're trying to do with regard to development in a certain area.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't need that as a code. I mean, the master plans are part of the comprehensive plan, they're not in the
That
code.
is,
I hear what Commissioner Ott is saying, it's my understanding that the purpose of these overlays is to codify it and require it.
Exactly. I mean, like the overlay districts is supposed to be that you then can just do, it's supposed to make it easier to do the things that the overlay
Exactly.
district describes. And so the way this sounds, I mean, we just talked about the overlay district in Mableton, which is supposed to allow Mableton, and that's why Commissioner Cupid talked about potentially holding it, was basically with an overlay district, you don't have to come to zoning because a lot of it becomes use by right under the design guidelines that you put in place.
That's not how I perceived it, and maybe the attorneys need to help, but, you know, when we do zoning, our stipulations and conditions are not, you know, they are brought about often through negotiation and agreement with the applicant or the board, but here it would actually become a requirement. So
See,
as
but those
opposed
are
to
more
being a stipulation, it's my understanding that once it's part of the overlay district, it becomes required unless it's waived.
Well, the way the terms were used in the past was
I'm
those are
sorry, the
design,
way- the way
what you just described, those were design guidelines.
I agree.
Okay, and so if you want the way you look something to look, an overlay district was to simplify the zoning process or the approval process, because in the overlay district, you would describe what was allowed.
I would love
And
for
so
Jason to
now
be
it
here.
sounds like we're changing that whole thing.
Yeah.
And if we're not intending to change it, then we don't need to be using the term overlay district, because basically, if they still have to come through zoning, I'm not really sure what this is accomplishing.
Okay, it's my